Okay, so second recorded lecture for March 31st. This is part one of child therapy, and we will have part two next week, which is basically just going to be TFCBT. Might do a little bit of some parent trainings and maybe some ABA type stuff. Also, we'll see. Um, uh, and I thought that this is an important article because a lot of times therapists, especially psychologists, are prone to this. You're worried about, well, what treatment's going to work? Well, some people might say, and I would be one of them, that we have treatments that work. What we need to figure out is what are the barriers to them working, or for people to stay in therapy so they can get the treatment, which treatments generally work. I mean, you want to know the empirically validated literature for the treatments you use. I mean, that's a high level of professionalism. Um, so it's important to understand when you do counseling, and this is something I've emphasized with you last semester, the semester by the emphasis on um, therapeutic alliance and barriers. Um, that's ninja level, and that's how you keep people in therapy so they can get better from the therapy. And you will look like a genius in your community, whether it's here or somewhere else, among professionals when you pay attention to this stuff, because you're going to be seen as someone who seems to have some magic touch with clients. It's kind of what we do at Florence Family Support Center is, we use a lot of this stuff in our engagements with clients, our attitudes towards them in turn when they get difficult. You're going to be seen as somebody who can handle difficult things. So this is important. This is a particularly nice article about barriers to treatment and premature termination or dropout, as the article says. So we'll go over this, and then I'll go over a really nice brief summary of four different child problems and the treatments for them. All right, so this is an article by Kasdan, Holland, and Crowley. And as you should know, when I refer to an article, it's going to be by the first author et al., right? So Kasdan et al. This is the Kasdan et al. Article. So in the exam, that's what we refer to. Okay. So this is a research study, right? So this is a research study. All right, here's the abstract. So introduction, where they talk about how important it is to understand why people don't stick in therapy. So especially for child and adolescent therapy. And as always, an introduction, a little bit of background, research, what other people have studied. All right, no single characteristic appears to be necessary or sufficient. In other words, there's no one thing that would be common in every dropout, and no one thing that by itself that's necessary and sufficient is a science term you should know. So necessary means it's got to be there for the thing to happen. Sufficient means by itself it can cause X can cause Y. So multiple influences, and that's why they use these hierarchical regressions, which I'm not expecting you to know. But you should kind of know how people look at relative influence of variables. Okay. Variables convenience means, what would you normally take at intake versus, hey, let's ask some additional things. Okay? All right. So as any good article, you're going to point out what's not been done and why your article does what's not been done. Okay? What are the reasons that low socioeconomic status causes dropout? Just because people are poor, you got to figure out, well, it's because they didn't have transportation, they didn't have childcare. You have to know exactly what it is. All right, expectations. Are they different among low SES groups, expectations of their kids, themselves? All right, so barriers to treatment model is their model, proposes that families experience multiple barriers associated with participating in treatment, and these experiences increase the risk for dropping out, all right? So the implication here is that during contact with the clinic, they experience barriers, of course, right off the bat, that make a separate contribution to dropping out beyond the more well-known factors like mental health severity. Of course, something like that's going to usually show up as a barrier to treatment or associated with dropout or poor treatment outcome, comorbid disorders. All right, and the emphasis on this, and another reason I like this article, what are the practical barriers? Childcare, transportation, all right? Perceptions that the treatment is demanding, takes a lot of time and effort. Well, a lot of reasons why that's a particular problem for low-income people. Little relevance to the child's problems, you know what we also call that, right? Treatment credibility. And of course, poor alliance. All right, so these things should sound familiar. So they had 3 interrelated predictions. Very important when you're summarizing a study. What was the reason for the study? They identify what they thought were the holes in the literature about barriers. Okay. What were the hypotheses? It's right here. We predicted that family, parent, and child factors identified intake would predict dropping out of treatment. Right. They also predicted that so child factors would be things about the parents or the family. All right, severity of mental illness, beliefs about child rearing. There's a lot of things it could be. All right, but now the second theory is about barriers. The first thing is about factors related to the family. Barriers would be sort of their experience of therapy, thinking about therapy, their experience of therapy that interfere with participating in treatment. And then this third one is important. They wanted to show that barriers to treatment would have its own effect on dropping out, that it's not all just other predictors that they already know about or other family factors. Okay, that there's something about this barriers thing that's separate and has a separate, measurable, significant impact on dropout. Okay, so they have some theories about why. Maybe not having barriers is more of a protective factor, or resilience, hardiness, all these things. All right, this is some technical thing here about moderation and mediation. I don't know. I hope they go over it in quantitative psych. Not sure we're really going to get into that too much, but they do a little bit of that at the end here. All right, so they did a 4-year study. Participants, so these are people, it's a clinic for children and families. They ended up having initial contact through a child psychiatry service. The children, they tend to be oppositional, aggressive, and antisocial, referred to a child conduct clinic. So there's the numbers. Okay, there was a prior study. The reason they mention the prior study is because they want to be able to defend why a second paper is justifiable, as opposed to why they just put it in the first paper. It's an issue in terms of publishability. All right. So then this is how they assessed all those things. So people came into therapy and they got a big bunch of questionnaires. Okay, family constellation, who's in the family, parental stress, parent history of antisocial behavior, which was, I think, one of the predictors, adverse family child rearing practices, which would be more reliance on physical punishment or harsh severity, the child severity and history of the kid's behavior. All right. All right, so questionnaire, some interview. You don't have to know all the details, just know that there were different ones. And they also got 3 sources of information: parents, children, and clinicians. Okay? And then there was some issue where they discussed barriers that came up later on. All right. So what did they look at for what just got referred to as family, parent, and child factors? Okay. So Hollingshead and Redlick, this is typical socioeconomic status, income, public assistance. They also asked minority group membership, family constellation factors, the mother's age, family structure, is a one parent, 2-parent family, child rearing practices, harsh. Get a score on that. So these were the 3 sort of child and family factors. Okay, test reliability, which you should know, but not part of this class. Parenting stress index, life stress index. Important things to know, don't you think? You start treating somebody, if they start perceiving you as adding stress, we have this issue with Florence Family Support Centers. We have some clients where we try to help them. They start to see it as additional work. And we've had a case where we just kind of backed off because the client was starting to perceive it, I think, as just extra stress or things to do, like more tasks. And they were already overwhelmed with just getting through the day. All right, barriers. We have the barriers to treatment participation scale, 58 items. Okay, obstacles coming to treatment, childcare difficulties, perceptions of alliance, perceived relevance of the treatment to the kid's problem, so treatment credibility. All right. All right. That's how they scored it. Stressors and obstacles to treatment. Another one here, interesting, conflict with a significant other about coming to treatment. I had a situation like that with, nope. Treatment demands and issues, perceived relevance. So these are subcategories. All right. Met with parent expectations, relationship with the therapist. All right, treatment alliance stuff. All right, critical event scale, discrete events. They lose insurance coverage. Well, why did that affect whether they got treatment? She got treatment anyway. Anyway, moved to another city, marital separation, so discrete, like actual events during treatment. Okay, so parent therapist versions, characteristics of the parents, kids. So what's the sample looks like? Very important for generalizing to your own work. You want to make sure you always look at this kind of stuff, right? Does it look like the kind of people, they look like the kind of people you treat? All right. All right. So they wanted to first show, and this was not the most important prediction, that family, parent, and child characteristics would predict dropping out. That is not the big news. For them, the big news would be the barriers part, which is the second. All right. So they did a multiple regression equation, and you can sort of rule out which ones. All right. So basically, parent-child factors, family predict dropping out. All right. The barriers experienced during treatment would be associated with dropping out. All right. Yes, of course. So they got it. So the relationship between barriers and dropping out, they show the graphs. So the other important part of this is important right here. The third hypothesis predicted that perceived barriers to treatment would contribute significantly after factors were already taken into account. And this relates to the moderation and mediation stuff, where basically you want to show that because these things all intercorrelate, right? All these things are related to each other. You want to show that the new variables, that the barriers variables, even though they correlate with the family factors, that statistically you can show that they by themselves have a significant addition to predictability. And that's what they found. Okay? The phrase they use, the results support the hypothesis that barriers experienced over the course of treatment added in an incremental way to and were not explained by, in other words, correlated with other, even though they were correlated, but you can rule it out, other family, parent, and child factors. So you got to know what the family factors were versus the barriers factors, two different things, and I just explained that, and it's clear in there. Okay? All right, very nice. They try to look at their whether there's more of a protective factor, parent and therapist differences. All right. So therapist versions of all these questions about the families and the barriers seem to have a bigger additional predictive value. Okay. So what they're looking at is multiple barriers. All right, what they want to look at is multiple barriers. Anyway, that's basically it on that. Okay, I go back over this again. So people with multiple barriers dropped out more often, right? Bottom line. And then that was statistically significant as a separate factor from all the other child factors, child and family factors, which also predict dropping out. So that's an important point. We can go over that if you want to discuss that at some point. Okay, so that's that. Nice article. You will look like a superstar. If you know that kind of literature, absolute superstar in your career. All right, I love this little thing. This was from some weird website, which is no longer available, or now they charge. I think we might have tried to pull it up at some point. This is what I'm going to refer to as the Therapy Advisor article. So 4 different kinds of problems and the treatments for it. Starts off with conduct disorder. Kasdan, should sound familiar, very behavioral-oriented guy. What do you do with conduct disorder, kids? So rule-breaking behaviors, bullying others, cruelty to animals, so violating the rights of others in your psychopathology class is the term you're going to hear or have heard. Forget if you've had that yet. So what they did, what he talks about the literature, and remember problem-solving skills training. They did a little different version of it. But teaching that to conduct disordered kids actually seemed to work. There was a control group. But if you've got a conduct disordered kid, you probably want to use problem-solving skills treatment. Okay. A lot of research. So what is the description? So you're basically helping develop interpersonal cognitive problem-solving skills. All right. So you're looking at how the kid's thinking, and of course, like problem-solving skills, step-by-step approach. To make statements to themselves that direct attention to certain aspects of the problem situation that lead to solution. So imagine the role plays in this. So what you get the kid, what I used to do in my role plays when I treated adolescents was I would, in the role play, when I wanted them to learn a cognitive self-talk skill, I would have them take a step back, like out of the scene, not out of the camera view particularly, and say to themselves, all right, now what am I supposed to do here? Number 2, all right, I've got to look at possibilities. Number 3, let me focus. 4, need to make a choice and evaluate. Okay? So basically problem-solving skills. The first one, though, is basically get the kid to say, all right, I'm going to do something different here than just throw something, attack someone, punch the teacher, run out, throw a chair. All right, what should I do? What am I supposed to do here? Number 2, okay, let me think of what things I could do here. All right, 3 is sort of review them. 4 is to pick one and try it. 5 is evaluate how it works. So all just typical problem-solving skills therapy. Okay? So you get them to say these things out loud to themselves when you're training them, and then you get them to say them to themselves. Okay? Pro-social behaviors, you're going to model them with the role play. All right? Reinforce them. Get them to try this out in real life. Repeated practice of problem-solving steps and applications in situations during the treatment sessions and during everyday life. Make sense? It's not a cognitive exercise. You actually have them do it, talk themselves through it when they're doing it in real life. At weekly sessions, so this is how they did it at weekly sessions, 30 to 50 minutes, optional. Parents are brought into treatment at different points. So this is just with the kids. They bring the parents in. Right? Tasks and games. You try to get them to avoid impulsive responding. Reward systems. Role-playing is used extensively. Okay. I don't know if I told you how I did tell you how I did rewards for participation in role play. They could get individual points, and they could also get group points that they could get various food items or music-related things, and then they also could get points for the group towards a little party, you know, basically food and music that I would have for them instead of the session, one of the sessions. Social reinforcement. Hey, good job. Right? Get the parents to train the kids also. All right, ADH treatment. All right, here we go. So basically, involves behavioral techniques in the classroom and teaching parents how to use behavioral techniques. So when you do your practica or internship and you're treating kids, if you get a CBT person, and I will get you who you might want something else, but for the most part, if you're going to treat ADHD kids, you're going to do parent training and you're going to do some sort of behavior modification in the classroom. Okay? What's up, boo-boo? How you doing, pal? I don't know if people can see you. Hold on. You being a good boy? This is Pookie. Huh? You a good boy? Yeah. You gonna help out today? What are you doing? A nappy nap? All right. I know. Well, I know. Hasn't had attention for half an hour. All right. Be a good boy. Yes, daddy's boy. Okay. So, let's go right to the treatments. All right. So research literature, control conditions, there's medication stuff. We should really talk about that at some point in one of our little live sessions. Okay. So a description of parent training, right? So you would do this with a lot of kids who come in for therapy. You do parent training. And this is behavioral parent training. You train them to be little Skinners, basically. Okay? It's structured. There's something called PPP that I think Crystal Hill Chapman has some special training in. And the school psych kids, students, get that. Lots of ways to get trained up in that. So basically, you train the parents in behavioral principles. Now, you can just imagine about treatment credibility when, well, I was beat with the switch when I was a kid, and why are we doing all this behavior? I shouldn't have to reward the kid. That's a big issue. We're not going to talk about today, but that's something that you're going to have to deal with. But a lot of these interventions include that piece of dealing with the parents. All right. So basically, first you get them to specify target behaviors. Like, what is the kid doing? He's being a jerk. Well, you need to define that. What's he doing? He's poking his sister. Okay, what do you want him to do instead? You want him to go, play on the Xbox without yelling. So that's all, like any good behaviorist, you operationalize things and you train parents how to operationalize things. And then consistent and regular rewards for positive behavior. So that's going to include noticing when the kid's doing something good. So you're going to catch them being good. There's a whole couples counseling version of that if you want me to go over, I'll go over at some point. So consistent and regular rewards for the behaviors you want them to do. Consistent management strategies for inappropriate or dangerous behavior. So use of timeouts or removing rewards. All right. You can also train the parents in their own anger management and effective communication skills. All right, so educate parents about ADHD is and isn't. All right. It's not an anxiety problem, it's an energy and focus problem. There's a lot of stuff around that. Specific behaviors, hitting sister, increase homework, develop a reward system. So you have to have a little token or some other reward system which you put up on the refrigerator, right? And you're going to check off when the kid's done certain things, they're going to get points or whatever. Functional analysis of behavior, antecedents, so you teach them to do ABC model, like behavioral ABC model, not cognitive. There's nothing cognitive here. This is pure ABC behavioral model, okay? So one of the main things you train parents is, I think we might have mentioned this, is how to ignore behavior. Parents don't know how to ignore behavior. So if a kid's acting out, a lot of the time you train them just to ignore it, as long as they're not hurting themselves or breaking things. You train them to ignore it because attention is a reinforcer. A central concept in dealing with kids is there's no such thing as negative attention. It's all reinforcing. Give the example, the dog's barking outside. What does everybody do? Go out and say, Pookie, stop meowing, right? Well, what did you just do? You just reinforced meowing because the attention. All right. Reward system, use of timeout, response cost, things like that. All right. Get parents involved, teachers involved, and that's very important. So anyway, you got all this going on at home. You can do focused behaviors as a target. So the parent learns to reinforce the kid focusing. All right. So the kid stayed in his seat at home where he does his homework for 5 minutes and looked at the book for 5 minutes, being reinforcer. All right. You can treat focusing behaviors as something to reinforce. Just because you have ADHD, it doesn't mean it's impossible for you to focus. It means it's hard. And anything that you can do, but it's hard, can be addressed with reinforcement. Mm. So details there. And then, you've got teachers doing similar things. So the kid stays in the seat. You can do a lot of other things too, and these are some of them here. Strategic seating, get the kid to sit a little closer. Prompting, reward system every 15 minutes. A lot of different ways to do this. Right? Teachers' willingness and ability. I run into teachers who have those kind of, I shouldn't have to reward the kid. He should know. Right. Very nice. That's basically how you do it. All right, depression. Well, guess what you do for kid depression? Hmm. Now, one of the things they mentioned is IPT, which you just read about. Hmm. So transitions and the things you would do related to that can reduce depressive symptoms in kids, because there are kids with major depression. But that's not considered a cognitive behavioral therapy. IPT is not considered a cognitive behavioral therapy. All right. So you would address cognitive distortions, all right? And of course, there's medication. A key piece of everything here, of course, is involving the parents in the therapy. Very involved in the therapy. You make sure the parents are doing what you're doing with the kids at home. They at least know what's going on, but you have to have them involved in actually doing things related to the therapy. So, the family's distorted cognitions, parenting techniques that perpetuate and reinforce the child's depression need to be altered. Okay, some basic goals, recognize connection between thoughts, family, all standard cognitive therapy stuff, you do it with the kids too. Okay, you'll see that in the TFCBT. Examine the evidence for and against, substitute more reality-oriented interpretations. It's not that different. All right, so affective education, just like you do with adults. How do you label emotions? Kids need a little more help with what they're feeling and putting a label on it. You can also do relaxation training related to stress. Okay. And like anybody would do in a more behavioral, not cognitive treatment for depression, is it might be they're depressed because they have such terrible interpersonal problem solving or social skills, and the more you help them gain those, the more their life becomes more pleasurable. Modeling means you and family members show them different ways of thinking and acting, using role play, homework, booster sessions, all that. And that's basically it. So all this stuff you should be familiar with for the most part. I like the headache one because it's a little bit different. And it's common, and headache is a very tough problem that there's not a lot of clear treatments for, or like one treatment for headache. As you see in the article, it's a mix of things that you probably want to do. You can have migraines, you can have tension headaches. So mainly, if you've read that at this point, you're going to see that you're going to look for things, making an assumption that there's stress underneath the headache, or strong emotions, or depression, or anger, that there are things behind it, even if you can't quite identify it, but you tend to look for things, and this is why you would do cognitive therapy with the kid. So you're kind of assuming that there's stressors, and you look for stressors. You make this life less stressful. All right? You could do a lot of assessment. So part of this is you would do a lot of assessment to see if you can't identify triggers. It's not as obvious as you think it would be. So I know the migraine literature a little bit, at least I did know the migraine literature. Very hard to identify triggers. Psychological ones anyway. For some people it's, they get hungry or flashing light thing, things like that. Now, number 2, attention and distraction is related to chronic pain. So what I should have added is it's not always stress, but you would do things that are chronic pain therapy type things, and we're not going to cover that in our course. I can't cover everything. I will cover it at some point if you want. See, I have to be careful not to reinforce him. But I think just the sound of my voice is reinforcing. I know not to you guys, but to him. So number 2 relates to the chronic pain approach, where you're not going to, I know, pal, I know, buddy. All right. The chronic pain approach here, where you're not going to really look for like the psychological thing behind the headache. You're going to treat it like a chronic pain problem. And one of the chronic pain approaches is distraction. You teach people distraction. So these are pain management strategies. All right? Cutting off messages from the stomach to the brain. Gate control theory, if you know the gate control theory of pain, which is why when people like hurt themselves, they do something else painful, like bang their hand, because there's like a gate. It can only do one thing at a time. It can only let one pain stimulus in at a time, so you want to have it do the lesser pain stimulus, letting it get to your brain. Distraction, all right. Concentrating. Part of that would be guided imagery, all right. So you tend to focus, this from our relaxation therapy, having very powerful, relaxing, pleasant images. It's almost like self-hypnosis. Biofeedback, biofeedback. So this is an old thing from the 70s. People still do this. You can basically, and they don't know really how it works exactly, there are behavioral explanations, but if you hook a kid up to a machine where it's showing numbers in front of him or her of the level of muscle tension, so you'd have sensors on the muscles here, say, and there would be numbers that show the tension of the muscles because of the readings from the sensors. And you have the person do different things, relaxing, but sometimes you just tell them, I don't think it's just this, but you say, get the number down. And you have them, sometimes they're doing something that's getting the number down, the tension down, and the headache would go away. So you help them learn control over their bodies. They've done this with blood pressure, lots of things. Not as popular as it was in the 70s, kind of the 70 things, but still done, still done. You hook people up to machines that have readings of biophysical measurements. All right. Skin temperature. All right. EMG feedback, so that's muscle tension. And clinical hypnosis. There are versions of hypnosis that are accepted in the psychology field as opposed to, somebody making people run around like chickens at a big show. All right, induction procedure. Those are some of the things, and I'll let you look it up. Relaxation training is big for this kind of thing too. Okay. Now with kids, of course, you see the turtle example, you want to use a lot of imagery, all right, that's related to being a child. Okay. So that's basically it. Gives you a little feeling for some things. Some of these are familiar to you in terms of how they're applied to kids. That's why I just really like this article with the 4 different treatments. And that's it. I'm going to end there, and we'll get this posted for you. Thanks very much.